Hi, this is Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan. So, trying to figure out what I want to talk about today, and there were so many different things that were going through my head, talking about communication and boundaries and fairies and that kind of thing. I decided it'd be a good idea to talk about how my mind works and what happened to me to make it different than a lot of other people's minds. Because if you're going to understand some of the stuff that I say, it might be a good idea to get an understanding of where I'm coming from. I briefly mentioned from time to time about being raised in an incredibly abusive environment. And that actually relates to what happened to me during this experience. Because when we have especially traumatic events that occur in our lives, when we're starting to walk a magical path and go through some of those processes in our brains, those things can come back up in unexpected ways. So my father was an alcoholic and a sadist. One of the things he enjoyed doing was torturing me and my siblings. And because of some of those horrific experiences that I had when I was a kid, I came to believe that there was something wrong with me. Now, this is not an uncommon result from having a terrible childhood or some kind of catastrophic event happen when you're young. Because the way our brain works when we're children, everything in the universe is us. We sort of automatically accept that everything we see, hear, and feel is related to us on a deep level and is because of us. And, until we reach a certain point in our mental development, we don't understand that there's a difference between me and my experiences and you and your experiences and other people's experiences. So one of the things that I came to believe because of that, because of thinking everything must be my fault, a few things followed. Figured there must be something horrifically wrong with me, that somehow my essential nature came out wrong, that the universe was expressing its hatred or dislike or the wrongness of me by putting me in those situations with these people that didn't know what was going on or didn't know what they were doing. And another thing that I assimilated from those experiences was a belief that there was something inherently wrong inside here, that there was an evil core or seed that I could never do anything about, that I could not eradicate, that it was eventually going to come out, and no matter whether I wanted it to or not, or whether I did all these great things or not and tried to be a good person, that there was no way to counter that it would just come out at some point and take me over, and that would be me. So those are two kind of important things in my subconscious that were really ingrained in there because of all these experiences, that when I went through what I'm going to share with you, it sort of informed what happened to me then. So in a lot of Aboriginal cultures, I had read about the process that medicine people in different cultures would go through when they were, getting ready to walk that path, because my understanding was that a person who was shamanic in nature, or a medicine man or medicine woman, whatever the cultural background was, one of the things that defined them was the ability to go from this world to the next and back. So sort of a walker between worlds is how I described it. And so the test that an individual would go through, according to the things that I read, was at some point you would have to go out into the spirit realm and then have your essential self, your ego structure, your spirit itself, consumed and utterly destroyed until there was virtually nothing left. And then the test was, could you put it back together and then come back to the people? And if you could do that and not just remain insane or a drooling idiot for the rest of your life, that was proof that you had that ability and that you had some authority when it came to communicating with invisible forces on behalf of the people. So if someone came to you with an anxiety, a fear, an illness, a bad dream, whatever it was, then you could do that kind of communication with the spirit realm or with the animal people or the plant people and be given a body of information that would assist the member of your tribe in being able to get better, and also have the authority to cast out negative spirits, etc., that kind of thing. So I had certainly at this point in time read about it because I knew about it, or at least I'm assuming I read about it. Sometimes there's things I know, I'm not sure how I know about them, but I know I've read things about that. And this was in my, well, say early 20s that this event took place. Quite early 20s. I was probably just 20, I think. It wasn't long after I got married that this happened. And when I first got married to my first husband, he was seriously into drugs, and I'd always thought that one of the things I should never do was mind-altering drugs. It's like there was this kind of understanding that I had within me that this would be a bad idea. But, you know, I'm still not very old yet and not necessarily trusting my own instincts. And he got me into LSD. The first time I did LSD, it was a fantastic trip. I enjoyed myself thoroughly. It was very fascinating. Time did an interesting thing for me where I was watching a seagull flying through the air, and the seagull would go like this and then keep on moving. Then I would see where the seagull had moved to, but then I would also see where the seagull had moved from. It was like, and after a period of a few minutes, there was about 50 of these, the same seagull in the sky, because like the, I don't know if it was after image or the memory of the image, or if it was a time thing, I don't know. But they were all there, so I could still see the beginning path of the seagull and then all of the permutations of its flight since, which I thought was way cool. So at first the use of drugs wasn't too damaging, I suppose. I mean, I didn't do it to try and do anything serious. It was more recreational, and definitely there was a lot of it. This was during the very early 70s, late 60s. I met him when I was, I married him when I was in 1969, so I was 19 when we got married, so I met him before then. And it was before we got married that he first got me into doing a hit of acid, I think. But who can remember? They say if you can remember that, you probably weren't there, right? So the time frame for some of those instances is a little bit lost on me. But I was back home at my mother's house. I was living with her at this point and my husband, and he suggested that I do a hit of acid to try and remember my past lives. And since I already had remembered several past lives from the time I was, really little, I thought, oh, okay, that's an idea. And we took a hit of acid. My suspicion is that the acid was cut with belladonna because of what happened to me. So I was over at a neighbor's house. We lived in an apartment building, and I was sitting at the table in this other woman's living room when it hit, I guess. I mean, it started up. And the beginning was the first few minutes were kind of interesting because there was a television on behind me, and I was looking at the wall, and I could see the television on the wall, and it was like Born Free, an old TV show about saving lions, and they were singing their beginning song, so it had just gotten started. And so I thought that was weird that I could see the screen of the TV on the wall in front of me when the TV was behind me. So I turned around and I looked, and I saw my astral form floating in the middle of the room in front of the television, like I was watching TV. So I was seeing through my astral eyes and being able to see that through my physical eyes at the time. So that's what started, and then from that moment on, all of a sudden everything went very, very wrong. Suddenly there were these things that were flying through the air, and they were pretty horrific looking. They had teeth, and some of them smelled bad, and they had claws, and they were just flying at me. And I went back to our apartment, to my mother's place, and it continued on. It went on for about 3 days, actually. It was non-stop for about 3 days, and at different phases during this experience. The thing that impacted me the most was I was seeing not my past lives when I was here alive, but I was seeing the time between my lives, so when I was dead, I guess, and going on with that. So the first thing that happened was each death that I experienced. So I had a life that I wasn't sure what it was, but I died, and there were these spirits that came, and they started asking me questions, and the question that seemed to come up the most often was, what's your key? And then I thought that meant, what did I learn from that life? And I would tell them, like, the key is love, the key is beauty, something like that. And then they would challenge that. And then they would go like, well, that can't be the key because it says blah, blah, blah. They were like mental gymnastics kind of thing in my head. And so I kept losing my keys. And then at some point, I managed to keep a key. I think it was the love key that I kept, because, it said something about, it says you're supposed to love your enemy, and I'm your enemy, you have to love me. And I said, I can't love you unless you love me. Do you love me? And then that was the argument that kind of broke this chain of events. So I finally kept a key. Well, that wasn't really necessarily the end of anything. It was sort of the beginning of something completely different. Because after I finally kept one of those keys from death, this giant, horrific, creature-looking thingy came up to me and said, I'm the keys you gave away. Now you have to remember me. And I'm like, yeah, right, no, not. There's no way you're a part of me. I can't remember you. I'm going to pass on this. But and that is actually around then, I think, that I realized that my spirit guide, Moida, who I'd had off and on since I was little, was there. She was like there behind all the hallucinations, and she was all bright and sort of blue and white, and wearing a crown, and trying to be all calm and reassuring, and telling me, hey, these are just your memories. You've survived them once. You've already survived them. It's not like this is really happening right now, and so you can do this. It's okay. And I'm like, yeah, right. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. You're over there. You can say that if you want, but I don't think so. So it took a while for me to get to the point where I decided that I guess I had to do that. So I started remembering the keys I gave away, and the things that came up were like extreme fears. I mean, the creatures that I saw in the beginning, that's what they were. They were like torturing me, and I couldn't get away from them because I getting back to my body didn't stop the process. Like ordinarily, if you're out in the mental sphere or the astral sphere and something like startles you, you jump back to your body, and your body is sort of like a barrier between, you know, this or what we consider our ordinary reality and these other things. But in this case, because of the drugs, it wasn't. So whether I was in my body or not didn't matter. They were all still there. So I had various challenges that came up, and one of them was the idea that the devil or Satan or whoever, because I was raised Christian in this life for a period of time, wanted to convince me I needed to go with them. Of course, this fed into the idea that there was some evil in me that I couldn't fight, and that I had to do that in order to save my, at the time, husband's soul. So if I really loved him, I would sacrifice myself and let myself go and join the hordes of demonic forces and be willing to prove my love. And this is probably about the only smart thing this particular person ever said to me. I woke him up. This was in the middle of the night, maybe early in the morning. It was still dark out. And I told him what they were saying. He says, "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do," which was like, wow, really? So I kind of like, okay then, no, I'm not going. And so as this continued on over this first 3-day period, the tearing apart of what I thought was myself was what was happening. It was like all these things I identified with were shredded and torn away and destroyed until I felt like there was almost nothing left of me at all. It was like a little grain, seemed like a tiny little grain of sand. That was the leftover essential part of me. And when that happened, when I got to that point, I started fighting back, because I'm like, no, you can't have all of it. I'm going to keep this piece, and you can't have it. And so then I started that process of trying to fight off some of these things. And I'm glad that my mother didn't take me to the hospital. I don't think that would have been a good place for me to be when this was happening. I mean, I did this in my home. My mother didn't really know what was going on. She knew something was happening, but she really didn't have a grasp of how dangerous and intense this thing was. Because I was like just nonstop, 24 hours a day, didn't sleep for the first 3 days, constant hallucinations and interactions with different parts of my subconscious, or different spirit beings, or different thought forms, whatever, yelling and screaming, or torturing me, or trying to convince me of something, to challenge me. And around the 3rd day, I realized I at that point couldn't eat anymore. There was nothing, I couldn't eat food because I would look at food and there'd be things on it, you know, things crawling on it. It would smell bad. It was very sensitive to smells. Eggs were like not just lightly sulfur, they were like intensely sulfur, and they smelled rotten and everything. And I realized, some part of me, I guess, realized that if I didn't start eating, that would be like not okay. So then I started trying to figure out how to get a little control back and get back to me somehow. And I started forcing myself to eat no matter what it was that I saw on my food and what it was doing or what it was saying to me. And so I started eating again, which was tricky, but I did it. And I remember one day, one of those days, I was outside sitting on a grassy hill looking at a tree, and the tree was just covered with these demon thingies, you know, ugly creature things. Were just climbing all over this tree. And I started looking at this tree, and I thought, okay, now I love trees. I think trees are beautiful, and I know that trees are beautiful and that life is beautiful. And so I started forcing the leaves to come through the creature things so I could see them for what they were. And this, I think, was probably the beginning of me really starting to put myself back together, my mind back where it belonged. It took a while, though. For the first year after that one acid trip, I probably hallucinated pretty much 24 hours a day, various stages of hallucination. I'd be, in the grocery store, and there'd be things floating in front of the cans in the grocery store yelling at me, "We want your keys." And I'm like, "Go away, I don't have any keys, leave me alone. There's no keys left here, go, go, go. Why do you want my keys?" And I'm sure everyone else in the grocery store would be looking at me like, "Okay, there's something wrong with that lady. There's seriously problems here." And certainly I've seen plenty of people who have mental health issues that are out there who are vividly interacting with their own hallucinations and fighting and arguing with them in some cases, like I was. So, I have an idea of what that's actually like, which is difficult to describe to someone who it hasn't happened to, and not recommended, by the way. I wouldn't want to wish what happened to me on my worst enemy, because I'm not sure how I managed to make it actually back all the way, because I did, but it took a long time. It wasn't an easy process. So it continued on like that. Some of the stuff I saw I know was real. Like, I woke up one night and my husband was coming in, currently not my current husband, obviously, because he's nothing like these people were. And he looked like just this giant demon. It was just evil and ugly. And I woke up and started screaming, because it was like, here's this creature coming at me, and he kept saying, "It's okay, it's just me, it's just me, it's just me." But he didn't turn back into just him. And later on, as I discovered that he was a sociopath and a serial rapist, I realized, looking back at that experience, that I probably saw his true self in that moment. But it was difficult to tell the difference between what was a real insight and more hallucinations that you couldn't trust. So the process of that has led me to go into therapy after the hallucinations pretty much stopped, and then gain some control over my abilities. So I believe, for me, that's what that was. That was a shamanic initiation journey. And when you are completely destroyed like that, your mind and everything that's in it is completely rearranged and utterly destroyed, and you have to pick up pieces and put them back together, you're never the same. It changes you in a fundamental way that's difficult to explain. And that's why I wanted to share this with you, because the things that other people are motivated by or that influence other people are often not things that influence or affect me at all. Like societal norms, the things that society has decided is appropriate or inappropriate, or how you should be, or what social pressures or peer pressures are that put you in a position to do something you might not want to do or might not be sure about. Those things don't really work on me much at all anymore. I've had to choose every step of the way. I have to choose who I'm going to be, how I'm going to respond, how I'm going to react, what are my values. And so I had to decide for myself. And in a sense, that's what this was telling me too. It was like, once I accepted the responsibility of remembering the keys that I had left behind, that notion was that I was now responsible for my own spiritual development. And there wasn't going to be some external force that was going to come in and say, okay, do this, do this, do this, or whatever. It's just going to like, here's your plate with everything on it. What are you going to take in, and what are you going to give back? And so the experiences that I have partly is partly because of that incredible breakthrough, utter destruction, and then reconstruction of myself, although I had a lot of those experiences before that happened. So there was that seed was already there, like when I was much younger, and met Moida, and encountered nature spirits and saw angels and knew about my own two guardian angels and all that kind of stuff that was sort of already there. And I think that was because of what my childhood was like, that without that I wouldn't have survived it. So I often think about how did I manage to get through that and come out, I consider sane. Maybe you won't, but I do. And I don't know. I really don't know the answer to that. This is not something one would want to have happen to them. This is not something to seek out. This is something that could happen and might happen. And the fact that I've gone through it and come out the other side of it and have survived it could be an inspiration to other people who might be going through something similar. And certainly, I've talked about this before, that I consider that ritual and magic is the missing piece for putting all, for creating yourself, for who you want to be. And certainly, years later, after the hallucinations stopped, and after some other relationships came and went, and other human trauma in my life and so forth, still trying to figure things out. It takes time to put that stuff together. I then was able, with ritual, to go through and get some of those deep-seated fears and anxieties out completely and get them out, which is why I shared the cup transformation ritual so early on in my videos. So if that interests you, you can look back through the videos and see that and try it out for yourself, because that's a way of transforming some of that stuff. So just a quick little update on my channel that you should know about. I just now found out how to get to all the comments, and YouTube doesn't have like a section for me to just look at and says, here's all the comments on all of your videos. I have to go to each individual video to look, so I'm going to try and be better at that. So if I have at this point responded to everyone's comments, I'm not sure if I might have new comments yet, but I'm trying to be more responsible for that. And if you want to get a hold of me directly, the email address is the same as my channel, shifrasmagicalcove@gmail.com. So you can send me an email, and I check that periodically, not all the time, but within every couple of days or so, I look at that email to see what might be happening through there. And certainly it's okay for you to contact me directly. So hopefully that's been interesting and informative. And if you have questions about it, please let me know. So this is Siofra Bradigan, and this has been Siofra's Magic Alcove. Blessed be.